I've been trying. Hi, welcome to our training. My name is Willa.
And my name is Thea.
And we're here with the National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum Arizona chapter. So welcome to our training called Protecting Our Vote. This training is hosted by NAPAF Arizona and by the Arizona Asian American Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander for Equity Coalition. NAPAF Arizona is dedicated to advancing social justice and human rights for AAPI women and girls in Arizona and across the United States. The Arizona AANHPI Equity Coalition fights to ensure marginalized communities are a part of the decision-making process and garner the appropriate resources. So thank you for joining us today as we prepare for the election of a lifetime. We hope that your families are healthy and safe during these challenging times of COVID-19 and during these heightened racial injustices. Regardless of where you are from originally, or what you do, or how long our families have lived here, Arizona is our home. So we're very excited to be a part of this training. The reason that I got involved with all of this work is that I had been a part of NAPAF many years ago. My family members are members of the coalition, and I was asked to come on to create some resources for voter suppression, for a voter suppression training. Before I started this training, I really had no idea what voter suppression was. And through my research, I realized that voter suppression spans a much wider net than I originally understood it to be. I thought that voter suppression was just people keeping others from getting to the polls and using intimidation tactics to keep people away from voting, when really voter suppression is so much more. And through my research, I realized that this has a much more personal connection to me. When I was 18 years old, and I was first registering to vote, I had to register 3 separate times in Arizona in order to actually be registered and be eligible to vote. And that is a form of voter suppression that I had no idea about. I had no idea that every time I've seen a false ad or something saying the wrong election date, that those are also examples of voter suppression that I've experienced myself. So that's why I'm very passionate about this and happy to be here.
Yeah, and for me, I mean, this is my first ever presidential election that I'm voting in. I'm 19, and it's been kind of hard and discouraging to see so much voter suppression and voter intimidation tactics going on when I had always thought of voting as just like, well, you turn 18 and it's your right to vote and you can just go and do it and it'll be easy. And but that's not always the case. But at the same time, it's been really inspiring for me to see so much of my generation and other people my age, even before we were 18 and we could vote, so many people I know were starting to do the work to register people to vote, to educate people about voting, things like that. And even beyond that, even beyond the important work that all of myself and like other young people are doing to get people to vote and make sure that they're eligible to vote, is I've been just so inspired to see all of the progressive work to get change happening even after the election occurs. So yeah, I'm just really excited to be here. Okay, so during this historic election season, we want to make sure that all voters are able to cast their votes without fear, misinformation, or intimidation. As immigrant communities and communities of color, we face discriminatory barriers and are at risk of feeling fear about casting our ballots. The goal for this training is to educate AANHPIs on how to identify and fight back against voter intimidation and suppression and create a sense of urgency to vote. So if you have any questions as we're going through this training, just type them out in the comments section.
So what is voter suppression? In short, voter suppression is any effort that's legal or illegal that prevents people from registering to vote or voting. So immigrant communities, limited English proficient communities, communities of color are disproportionately affected by voter suppression in comparison to white communities. Voter suppression tactics have become a lot more nuanced and sophisticated, and they now use modern technology to target our communities with ruthless efficiency. So we're seasoned fighters against voter suppression, and we've won on voting rights before. And once again, in this election, our communities are showing their power. They've registered a record number of AANHPIs and are providing language and other support to voters and volunteering to get out the vote as much as possible. Our communities and their ancestors have survived war, genocide, poverty, and left our homes with nothing more than the dreams of opportunity.
This year's election is anticipated to be the most racially diverse in U.S. history. In Arizona, more than 173,000 Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders are eligible to vote, and of that, approximately 40% still need to register to vote. We make up 4.6% of the AZ electorate, and our community has doubled in size over the past 10 years. From 2004 to 2013, the numbers of AAPI who registered to vote in Arizona increased by 165%. In this election season, we will not be silenced. We will not be intimidated. We will not be erased. We will not be turned away. Our future depends on us.
So let's talk about voter suppression in Arizona. Trust has obviously been shaken in this election. Arizona has a long history of voter suppression and disenfranchisement that spans our state's entire history. In the last decade alone, immigrant communities of color have faced multiple state-sponsored policies designated to suppress voters of color and limited English-speaking voters. In Arizona, between 2012 and 2016, election officials selectively and disproportionately closed polling places in non-white communities. Election officials also misled Spanish-speaking voters by claiming that the November 6th election would be held on November 8th in an official Spanish-speaking elections guide, a mistake that was absent from the English pamphlet. In 2016, HB 2023 criminalized the practice of community members giving their absentee ballots to community organizers to turn in to election officials. When Arizona first tried to pass this ban in 2011, the state's elections director admitted to the Department of Justice that it was targeted at voting practices in predominantly Hispanic areas. We've also seen attempts to limit voting, hours of voting, and under-resourcing community education on voting. This is why this training is so important. Our democracy works best when all eligible voters vote, regardless of language spoken, health, occupation, or ability.
So voter suppression occurs at 3 levels. First, the government may do things, such as passing laws and policies that create systemic barriers to voting. Second, at the community level, counties may unequally distribute resources, such as translating information into other languages. And then third, at the interpersonal level, individuals may spread misinformation. So let's go into each of these a little bit more. So if it feels like it's getting harder to vote, this is not an accident. At both the federal and state level, there have been more laws passed to limit voting rights in the last decade than any other period in history. The courts have weakened laws intended to protect our voting rights. And executive leaders like governors and even the President of the United States have spread false stories about voting fraud, which has intimidated voters. These discriminatory and needless barriers look like the headlines you see here. Felon disenfranchisement, fraudulent purging of voters from the rolls, voter ID laws, and complex voter registration procedures. It is critical that we continue to hold our government accountable. They should be doing more to stop these attacks on our voting rights and end disinformation that threaten our democracy.
Closer to home, at the community level, the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated barriers to voting, exposing long-standing cracks in the system and making our problems much more urgent. At the community level, resources are often unequally distributed and policies are unevenly applied. There are a long list of community barriers to the ballot, but I'll just give a couple of examples. There's a lot of moving, consolidating, and closing of polling places. While a substantial number of Arizona voters vote by mail, trends have shown that AA-NHPIs and other communities of color are less likely to vote by mail. Yet the number of polling locations available to in-person voters have continued to lessen over the last 8 years. Voters should never have to wait more than 30 minutes to vote, especially during a pandemic, but we're seeing longer lines than ever. We're also lacking proper and clear signage, which is highly important. Yet in the primaries, immigrant voters in Maricopa County reported trouble finding their new polling locations. There were complaints that signs were too little and too hard to see. Similarly, some voters in Maricopa County reported broken machines at the primaries. Lastly, adequate access to in-language materials and assistance continues to be a battle for our communities. People should be able to vote and protect their health amid a pandemic. We have heard the following across the community: increased racism against Asian Americans in the backdrop of comments such as the China flu, concerns about physical distancing at polling locations, long lines, difficulty getting ID due to DMV closures, and not enough time to train poll workers on language access rights at the polls. We cannot ignore these barriers to voting. We should not have to choose between public health and a functioning democracy.
Finally, other types of voter suppression operate at the interpersonal level. Physical intimidation, threats of violence, vandalism, and hate crimes are the easiest forms of voter suppression to spot. Intimidation can look like aggressive questioning about people's qualifications to vote, including their citizenship status, criminal record, or residency requirements. Voter intimidation also happens through the spreading of false information about voter requirements, fraud, and candidates. All of these headlines are written to get us to spread more misinformation. To guard against spreading misinformation, don't share anything until you've checked out the source. Other deceptive practices include things like individuals using official-looking seals to intimidate voters, flyers with bogus election rules and the wrong election dates, and robocalls with false information. If you start to feel or hear others saying things like, "I don't feel safe going to the polls, I don't know who is going to be there," this is voter suppression. Deceptive election practices are being used to deceive and confuse voters' thinking.
Interpersonal voter suppression also occurs through psychological tactics, which are especially hard to spot. It might feel like disgust, feeling like you're unhappy with your choices and so you sit out of the election. Or it might feel like apathy, feeling like your vote won't make an impact at all. So hearing someone say, "My vote won't even count, so I won't bother." Or it might feel like disenfranchisement and distrust, feeling like you believe that the system is just corrupt. So someone saying, "The whole system is wrong, so I won't participate." Have you ever felt this way? Tell us about it in the chat. We've definitely felt this way. These factors make people lose motivation to vote, or it makes them choose to just sit home and avoid participating in the voting process at all. Some candidates also use these tactics to dissuade or even intimidate voters from going to the polls, as well as to fire up their base. You may have seen the news reports that militia may appear at some of the polling places this election cycle. Even if these self-described militias don't actually materialize on election day, if many voters fear this, they might stay home on election day, and this will suppress the vote.
So what can we do? A lot. First, act now. Create a voting plan and educate yourself about the state and local races. Second, be prepared. Know what to do in case of intimidation. Know the deadlines. If things don't go as planned, make sure you have a backup plan. And third, community care. So vote and share your voting plan with 3 friends and family members and ask them to do the same. So we will now talk about each of these in a little bit more depth.
Knowing what's at stake for our community in this election, it's important for you to have a voting plan. A voting plan helps you think through how you're going to vote and what you need to make that happen. We've created a voting plan infographic for you. It'll be in the chat. So first, check your voting status and confirm that you are registered to vote at my.arizona.vote and make a plan for how you will vote. Are you voting early in person, voting in person on election day, or voting by mail? You can tell us how you're planning to vote, either early in person on election day, or by mail in the chat. So we already voted. We voted by mail early, and we dropped off our ballots at a polling location.
So if you're planning to vote in person early or on election day, first, know what time you're going to vote. Before work, during lunch, before picking up the kids. These are all factors you should consider. And also, know your polling location. Again, go to my.arizona.vote for the Arizona Secretary of State Voter Information Portal. Confirm how you will get to your polling location. Confirm childcare if you need it, and make sure to bring your ID, mask, and hand sanitizer to the polling location. Finally, share your own plan to vote with 3 friends and family and ask them to do the same. If you're planning to vote by mail and ballot, First, if you haven't received your ballot yet, you can check the status at my.arizona.vote. Once you've received your ballot, read the instructions carefully and completely fill it in. Seal, sign, and return your ballot by mail as early as possible before October 27th. Or better yet, drop it off in an official drop box like we did. Again, remind 3 of your friends and family members to vote. Remember, if you wait until the last minute, you're risking your opportunity to vote.
We have a lot of power to shape our local communities by voting all the way down the ballot. The candidates who win the less publicized races, like local representatives or county seats, have direct, tangible effect on our lives and communities. The 2016 race to replace Sheriff Arpaio is a good example. State legislatures where people pass laws like voter rights expansion, like getting rid of voter ID laws and expanding our options to vote. State legislator can create laws like expanding access to women's health. We've also seen too well how they can create laws in Arizona that hurt our communities. So remember to vote down the entire ballot, from president, congressional, and Senate to statewide, like state house and state Senate, and down to city and county seats and school board. And don't forget Arizona state propositions as well as local officials and measures. Make sure you are looking at every race and voting for the candidate that you believe in. Do your research, check your news sources, Google candidates and voter guides for more information. I'll do this too. In addition to creating a voting plan, it's important to act now by educating yourself on what to do in case you or a loved one faces voter intimidation and suppression. First, it's important to know your rights. You shouldn't be made to feel unsafe or intimidated while exercising your fundamental right to vote. Voter intimidation is against the law, and there are resources available to help you. So first, anyone threatened with violence should call 911 or another emergency service that they feel comfortable with. If you or someone else is being harassed or threatened at the polls, let a poll worker know. Then call and report it to APIA Vote and Asian Americans Advancing Justice, AAJC. The hotline is open and taking calls live in Bengali, Chinese, English, Korean, Tagalog, and Vietnamese. Spanish and Arabic hotline numbers are also provided on the screen. Remember, if something feels off, trust your gut. Call and report anything that doesn't feel right, and it's important to ask for help.
So voting can be confusing for anyone. For voters whose first language isn't not English, the process can be even more difficult. So when voting, remember that you have the right to bring someone of your choice to help you in the voting booth if you have difficulty with English. This means you can bring anyone into the voting booth with you if you need help. Vote without being intimidated or discriminated against by others. Intimidation or discrimination at the polls may look like harassing you or denying you the right to vote because of your accent, or challenging your right to vote under the false stereotype that you are not a citizen because of your race.
So next, we're calling everyone in our community to be prepared. Let's focus on common sense steps that we can take to safeguard our elections and our community's right to vote. First, know the deadlines. The last day to register to request a mail-in ballot was yesterday. So if you haven't received it yet, make sure that you check at my.arizona.vote for the status. Once you receive your ballot in the mail, return it as soon as you can. We recommend mailing your ballot as soon as possible, or at least before October 27th. Or better yet, drop it in a box at your voting center. Your ballot must be received by Tuesday, November 3rd at 7 p.m. It is important to note that voting by mail is safe and secure. So make sure that your ballot is counted. It is critical that you follow these instructions carefully. Early voting has already begun. You can vote in person early until Friday, October 30th, but dates and hours may vary depending on where you live. November 3rd is Election Day. Vote in person at your polling place, or make sure that your absentee ballot is received and counted by this day. Remember to wear your mask, bring your ID if you're casting your ballot in person. To request a mail-in ballot, find your polling place or in-person voting center. Locations and more, go to my.arizona.vote.
So plan how you're going to vote. Then make a backup plan, because it's 2020 and you've seen what this year does to plans. And finally, community care. As we look for the bright spots of this difficult year, I see tireless efforts of healthcare professionals, first responders, and essential workers who are on the front lines of this pandemic. I see the renewed calls for justice and equity happening across the country and around the world. In thinking about these signs of community, service, and togetherness, one fact has become clear. We have to take care of each other. The pandemic has highlighted the key issues facing our community: healthcare, housing, jobs, and social justice. These issues take on even more importance as we head into the elections. In a year when many of us feel helpless, this election presents an opportunity to act. Much in the same way that wearing a mask benefits you and your neighbors, voting is an act of community care. It's one way to take care of yourself and those around you. So, vote and share your voting plan with 3 loved ones and ask them to do the same. Check to see if elders in the community have a way of getting to the polls. Check in on any friends and family whose language might not be English to see if they need your support with translating the ballot. You can also volunteer to be trained on election protection and volunteer for the hotlines.
So, what can we do? Act now. Create a voting plan and educate yourself about the state and local elections. 2, be prepared. Know what to do in case of intimidation. Know the deadlines. If things don't go as planned, have a backup plan. And 3, community care. Vote and share your voting plan with 3 friends and family members and ask them to do the same.
There are those that fear our power. There are those who want us to feel small, insecure, and intimidated. AA and HPI communities have lived in Arizona since before it was a state. Our communities helped build this state. Our Chinese American communities built the railroads, dug the mines, and opened what businesses were allowed to. Our Punjabi American communities pioneered irrigation methods that gave rise to a cotton industry and cultivated lush orchards. Our Japanese American communities planted vast fields of vegetables and flowers. Our Filipino American communities helped build the agricultural industry and organized alongside the Mexican American community for the farm worker movement. Our newer Asian American communities, Vietnamese, Korean, Samoan, Marshallese, and so many others are among the fastest growing communities in our state. Our AAPI community's histories in Arizona runs long and rich. Throughout, our communities have never stopped fighting for a more just Arizona. Our message to you is: do not be intimidated. Do not be afraid. We are in this together. Our future depends on us. And now we will hear from a future voter. So we want to thank you for your participation in today's training. The recording will be available on NOPOF Facebook and YouTube page. If you find today's session as a valuable resource and you think others will benefit, please share this with your networks. And remember to vote. Thank you.